Beijing, 1461. The capital sleeps under a heavy haze. At the edge of the imperial city, soldiers in black armor stand motionless, their breath fogging in the cool air. Then, an explosion of drums. Flames leap from the rooftops as General Cao Qin's troops break formation and surge toward the crimson gates. "Long live the true emperor!" they shout. Sparks rise into the pre-dawn sky. Inside the forbidden city, eunuchs clutch edicts written hours earlier, the ink still wet. Courtiers rush barefoot across the marble corridors, silk robes brushing the cold floor. The smell of incense and gunpowder fills the air. A gate slams shut. For a moment, it feels as though the Ming dynasty itself might vanish before sunrise. Scenes like this are written across 2,000 years of imperial history. Rebellion is not rare. It is ritual. Each time the world begins to fracture, the people whisper the same ancient phrase: "The mandate of heaven has been lost." The emperor, once the son of heaven, becomes merely a man. When the people starve or armies turn on the throne, heaven's silence is taken as proof of divine judgment. That belief binds all of China's history together, a promise that every dynasty, no matter how mighty, will one day face its reckoning. Tonight we step through those moments of reckoning. 7 times the dragon throne shook. 7 times the world's oldest empire came within a heartbeat of collapse. The Han dynasty was still young when the first crack appeared. Founded on rebellion itself, it promised stability after centuries of chaos. But within 50 years, the empire trembled again. 7 princes, all descendants of the founding emperor, rose in defiance. They ruled vast territories, each with their own courts, armies, and ambitions. To them, the emperor's new policies were a betrayal. Centralization, taxation, control. They believed the throne had forgotten its roots. In 154 BCE, they raised banners embroidered with ancestral crests. From 7 provinces, armies advanced toward the heart of the empire. Villages burned in the crossfire. Couriers galloped through the rain to deliver desperate messages to Chang'an. The emperor's court panicked. "How do you fight your own blood?" General Zhou Yafu did not hesitate. He marched not to meet the enemy head-on, but to choke their lifelines. His soldiers dug trenches, cut roads, burned bridges. They moved in silence, the sound of spades in the dark louder than drums. Weeks later, the rebellion starved before it could reach the capital. The empire was saved, but its innocence was gone. No prince would ever again hold that much power. From that victory was born a colder truth. Only absolute control could preserve the peace. Centuries passed, and the same pattern returned. The rivers shifted course, crops failed, and the people believed heaven was angry once more. The short-lived Qin dynasty collapsed beneath its own reforms, and out of the famine came the red eyebrows. Peasants and refugees, they marked their faces with crimson pigment to recognize one another in the dust of battle. They were farmers who had lost everything, and they turned their desperation into rebellion. When the red eyebrows swept toward Chang'an, even the city's temples could not hold their faith. Priests abandoned their altars, scholars burned their books to stay warm. The wind carried the smell of mud and smoke. They toppled Wang Mang's regime, looted the capital, and, for a moment, placed a child upon the throne, a puppet emperor beneath a banner painted red. The empire became a mirage of power, its government a rumor. Then came Liu Shu, a distant descendant of the Han founder. He rebuilt his army slowly, city by city, his soldiers disciplined, silent and starved of glory. When he finally marched into the ruins of Chang'an, he found an empire exhausted by anarchy. The red eyebrows surrendered not to his might, but to their own despair. Peace returned, but the mandate's lesson remained. When hunger spreads faster than hope, rebellion is inevitable. The centuries that followed saw dynasties rise like tides. The Tang dynasty's golden age would become legend, an empire of poetry, porcelain, and sprawling palaces. But within those walls, the same bloodline rivalries festered. The morning of June 2nd, 626 CE, at the northern gate of the palace, history turned crimson once again. Prince Li Shimin waited beneath the archway of Xuanwu Gate. The air smelled of wet stone and horse sweat. Beside him, archers held their bows taut, waiting for the first shadow to move. His brothers were approaching with their guards, unaware they were walking into an ambush. The silence broke with the hiss of arrows. Steel clashed, shouts echoed against the walls, and the dynasty's fate shifted in a heartbeat. When the sun rose over Chang'an, the prince was no longer a brother. He was emperor. Li Shimin, known to history as Emperor Taizong, would bring decades of prosperity and reform. Yet his dynasty was born in the chill of that morning, in the echo of fratricide. Scholars later claimed the gate itself bled during summer rains, as if heaven had not forgotten. By the late 9th century, the Tang were dying. Drought, corruption, and arrogance hollowed their glory. A salt merchant named Huang Chao saw a chance to avenge the starving. His followers were merchants, bandits, farmers, ordinary men united by hunger. They marched beneath yellow banners, their songs blending with the cries of crows over the fields. When Huang Chao entered Chang'an, the once glorious capital became a furnace of smoke and terror. The palaces burned, the officials fled, and the empire's scholars, those who wrote poems for emperors, now wrote pleas for mercy. Far to the south, at the port of Guangzhou, foreign merchants disappeared in the chaos. The rebellion turned cities to ashes, and though Huang Chao eventually fell, the Tang never recovered. The dynasty survived in name, but its heart was gone. The poets stopped singing. The lamps of Chang'an went dark. From those ashes rose the Ming. Their founder, Zhu Yuanzhang, had himself been a rebel monk, a peasant who took an empire. His descendants built marble cities and golden halls, but the suspicion of betrayal never left the throne. In 1461, that fear came true. General Cao Qin, half Mongol by blood, had risen through the ranks to command thousands. When he heard whispers of an imperial purge, he struck first. Before dawn, his troops stormed Beijing. The sound of drums and gunfire rolled like thunder over the city walls. Courtiers woke to a sky lit by flames. The scent of smoke drifted through the courtyards of the forbidden city. Inside, the young Tianshun emperor knelt before the ancestral tablets, praying as the palace shook. Hours passed before loyal guards crushed the mutiny. The cobblestones outside the northern gate were slick with rain and soot. When the fires finally died, the emperor declared a new edict. No general would ever again command independent troops within the capital. The empire survived, but with its spirit scarred by its own defenders. 200 years later, a new dynasty would face the same lesson. The Qing emperors, Manchu conquerors ruling a Han majority, governed an empire too vast to hold by fear. They granted great power to regional warlords, 3 feudatories in the south who commanded their own armies and taxes. When the young Kangxi emperor attempted to recall their titles, the warlords rebelled. Wu Sangui, once the general who opened China's gates to the Manchus, now sought to rule it himself. His proclamation dripped with irony. He would restore order by breaking the empire apart. From Yunnan to Guangdong, his soldiers marched beneath banners of pale gold. The monsoon rains turned battlefields into swamps. Cities changed hands overnight. For 8 years, the empire balanced on the edge of disintegration. But Kangxi did not flinch. He studied, waited, and learned the art of patience. One by one, he cut the rebellion's roots, its supply lines, its allies, its pride. When the final fortress fell, he walked among the captured banners in silence. "Heaven rewards endurance," he murmured. The empire endured, but the cost was trust. Never again would the Qing grant such freedom to its generals. By the 19th century, that same dynasty faced its greatest test. Famine, flood, and foreign invasion tore the land apart. In the south, the Taiping Rebellion consumed millions of lives. In the north, another storm gathered. The Nian began as survivors of disaster. Farmers whose fields had drowned beneath the Yellow River. With no homes, they became riders. They moved in shifting bands, striking supply lines and vanishing into the mist. To the empire's officials, they were ghosts. Villages vanished overnight. Cities awoke to find their banners replaced by neon symbols drawn in charcoal. The imperial armies were stretched thin, fighting on two fronts. The sound of hoofbeats across the northern plains became the rhythm of fear. Even the emperor's edicts, written in flowing calligraphy, could not keep pace with the chaos. For 15 years the rebellion raged. Only when the Southern War ended could the Qing send modernized troops north, armed with Western rifles and new discipline. The final campaigns were fought in silence. Fields flooded deliberately to trap the riders, villages evacuated and left as traps. When at last the Nian were broken, the plains lay empty. The empire had survived, but its foundations were eroding. Within decades, the Qing would collapse entirely, undone not by foreign powers, but by the same ancient cycle of revolt and exhaustion. 7 times the dragon throne trembled. 7 times the empire stood at the edge of ruin. Each rebellion was born from a different wound: greed, hunger, fear, ambition. But they shared a single cause: the loss of balance between ruler and ruled. The mandate of heaven was not divine favor. It was an agreement of trust. Every drought, every corrupted tax, every unjust decree tore at that invisible thread until the people chose to rewrite their fate. Picture the empire after each storm. The palaces are quiet again, but the air still smells of ash. The scholars return to their scrolls, recording the emperor's triumph, though their hands tremble. Farmers rebuild their villages, burying the dead without names. The empire breathes, but never easily. Across dynasties, the lesson repeats. Power in China was never absolute. It was borrowed. From heaven, from the people, from time itself. Each generation of rulers tried to convince themselves that they had broken the cycle. None did. The stones of Chang'an, Luoyang, Nanjing, and Beijing still carry those memories. They hold the echo of drums, the flutter of banners, the scent of incense and fear. Each rebellion left its mark, not just on the palaces that burned, but on the souls of those who survived. And so, when you walk beneath the red walls of the Forbidden City, or trace your hand along the worn gates of Xi'an, remember, those walls once trembled. They listened to the shouts of princes, the prayers of peasants, the thunder of hooves. 7 times the empire nearly fell. 7 times it rose again, scarred, smaller, but alive. Because in the end, China's story is not just one of power, but of endurance. The emperors changed, the banners faded, yet the belief in order, however fragile, endured. Between rebellion and renewal lies the heartbeat of civilization itself. And even after 2,000 years, if you stand in the silence after the storm, you can almost hear it still.